What's going on, guys? Scar coming at you with another Magic the Gathering video. In today's video, we are going to be discussing today's announcement of the ban and restricted announcement. I know you probably already seen, you probably already know when what these cards are. I just wanted to give my own personal opinion, just because I've been doing a decent amount of Magic the Gathering videos for a good solid time, and being a long time Magic the Gathering player, sometimes when certain announcements happen, it's a big change in the format / meta of what currently is happening in Magic the Gathering. So I kind of want to go over the cards that got banned, kind of give my personal opinions of each, and also kind of like discuss maybe like what the future of the meta kind of looks like, what decks are gonna maybe pop up as being like the decks that maybe just will dominate the meta for the little while until people really figure out like what is maybe the next best deck. But with all that said, let's just dive into it, kind of go over everything. I'm not really going to do any like cuts or anything as this. I'm just doing this as like a bonus video, so this will go up like pretty much immediately after I record it. So if you guys do watch, I do appreciate it, just because we post on a day that I normally don't post these kind of videos. So with that being said, first things first, we're going to be talking about the fact that there's a new companion rule. I think this is the one that I think caught most people off guard. It caught myself off guard. I was more on the idea of either that they would just get rid of the rule completely altogether, just because yet again, it's a card advantage that, depending on the planeswalker that you had, just having a bonus card in your hand is a benefit, regardless of you going first or second. Just being able to have 8 cards is just definitely an advantage, and you're definitely always able to draw that one companion card, even if you play multiple copies in your deck to fill out the companion card like the Guru does. With that being said, this one kind of makes those companions that are outstanding in the way that you saw form in a lot of decks. The Orianas, the Lorises, I guess Kahira could be thrown in there just because it starts seeing play in some of like the control decks that just rank Kahira just because they can, and they didn't play companion to begin with. As well as I think it hurts a couple of cool decks I think that came out of this that may end up in the top tier meta, but it does hurt some of the other companions just on the basis of these cards are just never going to see play as a companion ever again. I mean, I think this is completely nerf to the rule to just make building a companion deck a complete disadvantage, because the ability of, if you guys don't know, once per game at any time you cast a sorcery during your main phase, when the stack is empty, you can pay 3 generic mana to put your companion from your sideboard into your hand. This is a special action and cannot and not an activated ability, so there's no way that you can like lower the cost of an activated ability to make this cheaper. So it's 3 costs no matter what. Now it goes into your hand. Like Aloris, for example, it's the deck you play when you do that companion thing. The deck is very low cost, so typically you play it on curve or maybe like a couple turns later. But given it now being in your hand, it kind of gives the opponent an opportunity to kind of do something about it. It also does make those companions just that much more expensive. So in a smaller weenie style deck that Loris is being built around, it made it definitely, now makes it a disadvantage. Like, it doesn't seem optimal to run him as a companion. In that case, you probably just want to throw him in the deck and maybe run 4 of them just so you draw more. But I mean, some of the decks that still run him, he wasn't the main focus. He was just an added benefit just because they played low cost cards to begin with. So I guess, it's okay. Like, it kind of sucks that Loris is one of those cards, but I think he was one of those cards that kind of made the meta not fun, just because it's just one of those things that some decks that played it just was very, very repetitive. With that being said, I think, the control decks that maybe play Yorion, maybe it's okay that they run the Yorion, run it maybe in the late game, maybe they have multiple omens out and stuff like that. They may just have the mana to spend and get a Yorion proc, so it's maybe not the biggest of deals. 80 cards, as we've seen, even with Yorion as the planeswalker, it doesn't hurt those decks. It just lets them play more copies of those certain powerful cards. So we'll kind of wait and see how that plays out. But I think it does hurt a few of them. I forget off the top of my head what the singleton one is that is a companion. I just feel like no one was really running him to begin with, and now that we added this rule, no one's gonna play that companion whatsoever as a companion. There's also Kahira, which I didn't really see a lot of play in the meta as a whole, but Kahira's also not Kahira. It's the white and red one. I can't think of the name off my head. If you know it, let me know down in the comments below. Sometimes like magic cards slip my mind, or I think they're one card and then there's something else. Well, I mean, with that being said, the one planeswalker that literally was the Fire's planeswalker, like for Fire's Invention, is now pretty much not a thing anymore just because Fires got banned. But that's a discussion once we get to the banned cards themselves. You know, and I actually ran the Obosh odd deck in the open over the weekend. I went 6-2 or 6-3. I just missed day 2, but I honestly felt like that was a good change of pace for the mono red matchup. With that being said, I think we're going to see a lot more mono red, but yet again, that's for the discussion at the end of the video. Now let's get into the ban cards. Agent of Treachery, I think, was just the most obvious one. I think everyone across the board saw that one coming, just because there's the many ways that you could cheat out an Agent of Treachery for not paying for its full mana cost, the ability to ramp up into 7 fairly quickly in the meta, and just the ability to have so many ways to flicker it out and into the battlefield and get so many procs of it just kind of ruined the game state. It's, you know, pretty much once you saw the one agent, you just knew that they always had another way to get another trigger of the agent. So that one was like the most obvious one. It is the most frustrating one because, you know, I there's been many times where I got against an agent and it's like a scoop for the most part, because once they agent and start stealing your stuff and they have a way to trigger it multiple times, you're just gonna scoop up and call it a day. So agent seemed pretty obvious. I mean, the other thing too is agent's gonna cycle out in October once M21 comes out, but I mean, I feel like it was due time anyway, just because the amount of ways that you can break, or, you know, it became too strong with the ways that you could, you know, abuse the power of it itself. Fire Intervention was an interesting one. I think it was one of those ones that was on the fence. But I think this kind of goes into play that Magic the Gathering as a whole always is a best of 3 game. With the recent addition of Magic the Gathering Arena in more recent years, I wouldn't say just, you know, this past year, but with the added ability of best of 1 and best of 3, I think a lot of these decisions also look at a best of 3 meta, just because of competitive play and just because most tournaments are done in the best of 3 play. I know this past weekend it was day 1 of best of 1 and then day 2 was best of 3, but I would assume Fires of Dimension was found in a lot of the decks that were placed in high, or just were cards that were just like, even if they weren't like the card that was gonna win the game, I would say Fires of Dimension and Agent of Treachery are both cards that were in like the probably some of the decks who probably walked away with $2,000. I actually don't know if there's any results anywhere of who won day 2 and what decks won day 2. Let me know down in the comments below as well if you know where the results are. I would like to actually see what decks came out. I would like to see if there's any surprise decks that maybe we just haven't seen in the meta, but my gut feeling is that Fires of Invention decks and decks that ran Agent of Treachery probably like a good portion of the meta, just because in a best of 3 matchup, both those style decks are very, very strong, just because, like, again, Fires of Invention's ability to limit you on how many cards you play a turn that you do play, but the ability to not have to tap your mana to do it, and then making you able to use, you know, the tap mana to use certain ability on the card itself is, I actually think it's a very powerful way, because I mean, turn 4 you play Fires and then you play a 4-drop, so you now just spend 8 mana in a turn where you normally would only spend 4, so you get double the power. The following turn afterwards, if you're playing a Yorion deck or even just the normal Fires deck, it's like you can drop 2 5-drops, and at that point it's like game's pretty much over, and your opponent really is just sitting there to not being able to react, because, you know, there's probably a good chance, just because we've all done the Fires deck, where they probably have a Teferi out, or, you know, you're just in a bad spot because maybe you played something more aggressive and they already Clarion to wipe the board. So definitely a card that I think, you know, deserves probably a ban-in, just because I think it also gimps possibly the future of what cards they could have brought out powerful wise, because if you could, you know, sneak them onto the battlefield for, you know, pretty much essentially free, even if you're limited to how many spells you can play a turn, and just limited in like the abilities that they had tap mana to do this certain ability, I think it almost like, you know, hurts that they have to like think about how to build a game around a particular card. With that being said, I'm actually kind of surprised that both cards are also suspended in Historic. There's a couple cards I think could have been also on the list for a Historic play, not maybe the standard play. But I mean, it makes sense, I guess, if it's only suspended, so it's like there's a chance that these cards can come back. I just think that like there's certain decks out there, even in the Historic meta, like Winona, for example, is just one of those cards that just sticks out as maybe one of those cards that you may see more prevalent in the format. Maybe not in the standard format, just because there's not many ways to really take effective use of it. Like the Jeskai Winona deck was, you know, that was focus was to get Agent of Treachery out kind of at a cheaper rate. But in like historic, I can definitely see Winona still, you know, getting cards because the playfield of what creatures you can use in are much larger, and there's cards in there that are still very, very strong even without the Agent of Treachery. Agent of Treachery is a little extra seasoning, I guess, on that Winona cake. But I mean, that's maybe something that they're going to see as more results come in. You know how it is, like typically you play like the standard for a couple months, and then the format gets kind of stale until there's something new introduced. So we'll see maybe how Winona shapes up as more people start really playing standard or historic focused metas. But overall, I think these both were pretty good decisions. Like I said, I think it's a part of the, you could argue that there's other cards they could have also targeted. But I think the removal of these cards from the standard format, I think, helps the meta as a whole. Because just playing against a Fires deck, or even a deck that plays Agent of Treachery, or even both, it's just one of those things that just kind of, I guess, messes up the meta. The companion rule, it does kind of suck, just because it almost makes companions unplayable. But I can kind of get it, because I guess this was the best way to make it just maybe that little bit harder. It's actually been kind of interesting how they do the paper form, just because, you know, all these companions have now just been produced with the rule before this current announcement. But maybe there's just a rule that will go out, and maybe future prints of these companions, if they do a second runner of Ikoria, will have this additional rule on it. Who doesn't love an additional rule card, or just much more smaller fonts on your cards? But with that being said, it's effective, I guess, today. So if you're playing Paper Magic, you can't play these cards in Paper Magic tournaments today, and then we'll see these changes on the arena. So if you're like wondering, like, wait, I saw someone playing these cards still, well, you have 3 days effectively to use and abuse these cards until you no longer are able to play them. But moving on, there's a couple decks that kind of stand out to me. I kind of mentioned one of them that you'll definitely see a whole bunch once this comes out, just because, I mean, the deck itself was strong already. It's just that, you know, there was some stuff that was a little bit stronger, and that's going to be like your mono red deck is going to definitely stand out. It won't be the mono red deck that had Obosh, but it'll be the classic mono red that plays Embercleaves and Torbrands and stuff like that. So just a heads up, probably when you're playing the game past Thursday, definitely gonna run into a lot of mono red setups. I think another deck that's actually pretty interesting that I think will get a little bit of love, that kind of fell off a little bit, will probably be the Team of Reclamation deck. If people start going to a more aggressive meta, maybe want to build a Team of Reclamation deck that's going to be a little more creature removal. I actually can also see the Cycling deck that currently is out there, even without the Loris, is still very strong, just because you can cycle for cheap, get creatures that pretty much ping your opponent for damage. You buff up your Fox to very, very big, and then eventually, you know, you just tap 4 mana and do whatever damage to your opponent's face and gain X amount of life based on how many cycling cards into it in your graveyard. So definitely that's a card that you may want to look out for, like deck that you want to look out for or build if you're looking for like a new deck, like what to play, and that's also very cheap, very budget friendly. I honestly think there's gonna be decks that are just gonna come back that kind of were around beforehand, and it's gonna take some time for these other decks to kind of come back. I would also say Control's gonna, like a Azorius Control style deck is definitely gonna be also prevalent. I also think like the Yorion's still gonna be a thing that you'll see, just because a Control deck can afford the spend the mana to maybe get the cards in there, and especially if they have an answer for what the opponent could play to counteract the Yorion. But like I said, as for the other companion stuff, I honestly think companions as a whole are kind of like dead, because I mean, why would restrict yourself on building a deck if you can't get the companion for the actual effect? But with that being said, guys, that's my side of how this all happened. Let me know down in the comments below what you think of these bans and restrictions. And if you like this video, hit that like button. If you want to know when I post more videos, hit that subscribe button. I'll catch you in the next video.